are back with another review. Um, Before we get into more of the Greek mythology and what we were talking about during the last couple of weeks, I do want to start with saying that I just started college. Like I said, my first class, I missed it on Tuesday because I grabbed the wrong paperwork, but I showed up Thursday, and I've been doing pretty well just within that one day. Um, I just took my test online for my college class. I got 13 right out of 15, which is still a passing grade. It's pretty good. Um, Also, we just have sad news. George Foreman, a boxer who was a big time boxer back in the old days, basically just died. He was 76. Um, so that's pretty sad news right there. But before we get that's just a little brief take here. Um, Before I get into my Greek mythology, this is a class I'm taking called Fluid Power. Um, Not an easy thing to learn, but we're learning about how to. For the first day, we were learning how to read pressure gauges, which is going to be a big topic throughout that course. Um, a little more on that later. So for Greek mythology today, we're going to talk about Achilles. Um, so in Greek mythology, Achilles is a Greek war hero of the Trojan War. Trojan War, I do want to do a video on that later on. Not today, but maybe next week, when I figure out my whole schedule and everything. Um, Now Achilles is a central character in Homer's Iliad. If you ever read the book Homer's Iliad, he's a big figure in that book series. Um, and he's the son of Thetis and Peleus, who's the king of Phthia and a famous Argonaut. Now Achilles was raised in Phthia along with his childhood companion Patroclus, and he received his education by the centaur Chiron. A centaur is half man, half human. Um, is like half man, half horse. Basically, he has to look. So for a centaur, from the waist, from the torso up, they're human, but from the torso down, they have the body of a horse. That's what a centaur is supposed to be in Greek and stuff like that. Now, in the Iliad, Achilles is presented as being the commander of the tribe of the Myrmidons. Um, Now, Achilles, his most notable feat is during the Trojan War, and he was known for slaying the Trojan prince Hector. The reasoning for that is that because Hector killed Achilles' cousin Patroclus, thinking it was Achilles, and Achilles wanted revenge for that. Um, and he basically killed Hector outside the gates of Troy. Now, although the death of Achilles is not presented, and is not presented in the Iliad, sources can concur that he was killed near the end of the Trojan War he was killed near the end of the Trojan War by Paris, who shot him in the heel with an arrow. Um, Now, later legends, beginning with Statius' unfinished epic Achilliad, written in the 1st century CE, it states that Achilles was invulnerable in every part of his body except for one heel. Um, Now, according to that particular myth, when Achilles' mother Thetis dipped him in the river Styx as an infant, she held him up by one of his heels, leaving it untouched by the waters, and thus that part being the only vulnerable part in his body. Um, Now, alluding to legend, now alluding now alluding to these legends, the term Achilles' heel has come to mean a point of weakness for somebody, which can lead to especially a downfall especially in someone or something with an otherwise strong constitution. The Achilles tendon is named after him, which is following that same legend. Um, Now you can see here some of the Greek mythology stuff. Hold on here. So right here, you see what's supposed to be Theseus slaying the Minotaur under the gaze of Athena. This is what Achilles is supposed to look like, or at least that's what our theory of what he's supposed to look like is. So, no, there's something called linear B tablets, and they attest to the personal name Achilles in the forms of Aki or Ryu and Aki I don't know if I'm saying that right. But the latter being the dative of the former. Now the name grew more popular at becoming common soon after the 7th century. And was also turned into the female form Achillea, attested in Attica in the 4th century BCE, and in the form Achillea on a stele and Halicarnassus as the name of a female gladiator fighting in Amazon person. Now, Achilles' name can be analyzed as a combination of achos, which means distress, pain, sorrow, and grief, laos, meaning people, soldiers, nation, resultant in a protoform called Achilles. He was also the he who has the people distressed, or he whose people have distress. Now the grief or distress of the people is a theme raised numerous times in the Iliad, and frequently by Achilles himself. Achilles' role as the hero of grief or distress forms an ironic juxtaposition with the conventional view of him as the hero, usually meaning glory and usually in war. Now, who knows if Achilles would have lived longer, but he did have a choice. The mother came to him and told him that you could settle down, you could have a wife, you could have a kid, you could have kids, and they will tell stories about you, but your name will die throughout the ages. Or you can have the honor and glory, but you will die and you will not come home. And he wanted all the honor and glory, so he basically decided to have his name live throughout the ages by joining the Trojan War. Now, furthermore, Laos has been construed by Gregory Nagy following Leonard Palmer to mean a corpse of soldiers or a muster. Now, with this derivation, the name obtains a double meaning in the poem. When the hero is functioning rightly, his men bring distress to the enemy, but when wrongly, his men get the grief of war. And this poem is part about the misdirection of anger on the part of leadership. Now, some researchers deem the name a loan word, possibly from a pre-Greek language. Achilles descends from Thetis, and the similarity of his name with those of the river deities such as Acheron and Achilles have led to speculations about him being an old water divinity. Now, Robert Beeks has suggested a pro-Greek origin of the name, based among other things on the coexistence of an epic language, which may account for a paleotized phoneme in the original language. Now, Achilles is the son of Thetis, who's because Thetis is his mother, and he's also and she was the daughter of an old man of the sea, and Peleus, who's the king of the Myrmidons, and also an original Argonaut. Now, Zeus and Poseidon had been rivals for Thetis' hand in marriage until Prometheus, the forethinker, warned Zeus of a prophecy originally uttered by Themis, who's the goddess of divine law, that Thetis would bear a son greater than him, um, or greater than the father for one. Now, for this reason, the two gods withdrew their pursuit and had her marry Peleus. Um, Now, there is a tale which offers an alternative version of these events. In the Argonautica, Zeus's sister and his wife Hera alludes to Thetis' chaste resistance to the advances of Zeus, pointing out that Thetis was so loyal to Hera's marriage bond that she coldly rejected the father of the gods. Now, Thetis, although a daughter of the sea god Nereus, was also brought up by Hera. Now, further explaining her resistance to the advance of Zeus, Zeus was furious and decreed that she would never marry an immortal. Um, Now, according to the Achilles, written by Statius in the first century, and to non-surviving previous sources, when Achilles was born, Thetis tried to make him immortal by dipping him in the river Styx. However, he was left vulnerable, but at the part of the body by which she held him, which was his left heel. Now you can see some of the stuff here. Here's Achilles' mother dipping him in the river Styx, and you can see right here that she's holding him up by his heel. Because that part right there, his heel, was not touched in the water, he was able to die through that part alone. And then you got this down here. This is supposed to be the education of Achilles. This is done on a pastel paper back in 1862. That's actually at the Getty Center in Los Angeles. And this is supposed to be, this is Achilles sitting on the bench and Chiron teaching him, because it basically states that Chiron was the one that taught him everything he knew. Now, it's not really clear if this version of events was known earlier, but in another version of the story, Thetis anointed the boy in ambrosia and put him on top of a fire in order to burn away the mortal parts of his body, but she was interrupted by Peleus and abandoned both father and son in a rage. Now, none of these sources before Statius make any reference to his to Achilles' general invulnerability, but on the contrary, in the Iliad, Homer mentions Achilles being wounded. In Book 21, the Paeonian hero Asteropaeus, son of Pelagon, challenged Achilles by the river Scamander. He was ambidextrous and he cast a spear from each hand. One grazed Achilles' elbow, drawing a spurt of blood. But in the few fragmentary poems of the epic cycle, which describe the hero's death, the Cypria, the Little Iliad by Lucius of Pieria, and so again, there was no trace of any reference to his general invulnerability or his famous weakness at the hill. But in the later base paintings presenting the death of Achilles, the arrow, or in many cases, arrows hit his torso. Now Peleus entrusted Achilles to Chiron, who lived on Mount Pelion and was known as the most righteous of the centaurs to be reared. In some accounts, Achilles' original name was Ligrion, and it was later changed to Achilles. The name later changed to Achilles because of his tutor Chiron suggesting it. According to Homer, Achilles grew up in Phthia with his childhood companion Patroclus, but Homer further writes that Achilles taught Patroclus what he himself had been taught by Chiron, including the medical arts. Now Thetis foretold that her son's fate was either to gain glory and die young, or he could live to a long age, but uneventful life and obscurity. But Achilles chose the former, and decided to take part in the Trojan War, meaning he wanted the honor and glory. Now, according to Photius, the sixth book of the New History by Ptolemy Hephaestion, it reported that Thetis burned in a secret place the children she had by Peleus. Now, when she had Achilles, Peleus noticed and tore him from the tore him from the flames with only a burnt foot, and confided him to the centaur Chiron. But later, Chiron exhumed the body of the damned of the Demysia, I don't know how to say that, of Demysis, who was the fastest of all the giants, and removed the ankle and incorporated it into Achilles' burnt foot. Oh shit, hold on. That's not it. Hold on. Now here's Chiron with Achilles, and Chiron is teaching Achilles how to play the lyre, which I've never played any musical instruments, so don't ask me about that one. I was never good at that one. Now everybody has their own description of what they think Achilles looks like, and what he could look like if he was in today's world. Now in Homer's Iliad, Achilles is portrayed as being tall and striking, with strength and looks that were unmatched among the Greek warriors. Now Homer describes Achilles as having long hair or a mane. Along with other characters, his hair is described as being yellow, or at times shades thereof, such as brown or auburn, and was used mostly for fair hair. Now, a later Latin account, probably from the 5th century, falsely attributed to Darius Pyrigius, described Achilles as having a large chest, a fine mouth, and powerfully formed arms and legs. Now, his head was covered with a long, wavy, chestnut-colored hair, though mild in manner. He was very fierce in battle, and his face showed the joy of a man richly endowed. Now, in some post-Homeric sources, they claim that in order to keep Achilles safe from the war, Thetis, or in some versions Peleus, hid the young man dressed as a princess, or at least a girl, at the court of Lycomedes, who was the king of Skyros. Now, Achilles, properly disguised, lived among the Lycomedes' daughters, perhaps under the name Pyra, known as the red-haired girl. Circe, which means swift, with Lycomedes' daughter Didamia, with whom he had begun a relationship. Now Achilles, supposedly fathered two sons, Neoptomalus, also called Pyrrhus, after his father's possible alias, and Oniros. Now, according to the story, Odysseus learned from the prophet Calchas that the Achaeans would be unable to capture Troy without Achilles' aid. Now, Odysseus went to Skyros in the disguise of a peddler, selling women's clothes and jewelry, and placed a shield and spear among his goods. Now, when Achilles instantly took up the spear, Odysseus saw through his disguise and convinced him to join the Greek campaign. But in another version of the story, Odysseus had arranged for a trumpet alarm to be sounded while he was with Lycomedes' woman. Now, while the woman fled in panic, Achilles prepared to defend the court, thus giving his identity away. Now, here's a painting here of Achilles supposed to be disguised as a woman, but it's kind of hard to really see that. And then there's another statue down here of what Achilles is supposed to look like. This is a marble representation of Achilles at the court of King Lycomedes around 240 CE. Now, according to the Achilles, Achilles arrived. Um, Achilles arrived at Troy with 50 ships, each carrying 50 myrmidons on each boat. Um, he appointed 5 leaders, each leader commanding 500 myrmidons. Um, he basically appointed Menethius, Menestheus, Eurodorus, Pisander, Phoenix, and Alcimedon. Those are the people he appointed to lead the Myrmidons. When the Greeks left for Troy and for the Trojan War, they accidentally stopped in Mysia, ruled by King Telephus. In the resulting battle, Achilles gave Telephus a wound that would not heal. Now Telephus consulted an oracle who stated that that wounded shall heal, and guided by the oracle, he arrived at Argos, where Achilles healed him in order that he might become their guide in the voyage to Troy. Now here, now according to other reports in Euripides' lost play about Telephus, he went to Aulus pretending to be a beggar and asked Achilles to heal his wound. Now when Achilles refused, claiming to have no medical knowledge, alternatively, Telephus held Orestes for ransom, and the ransom being Achilles' aid in healing the wound. Now Odysseus reasoned that the spear had inflicted the wound, therefore the spear must be able to heal it. Pieces of the spear were scraped off onto the wound, and Telephus was healed. Now, according to the Cypria, the part of the epic cycle that tells the events of the Trojan War before Achilles' wrath, when the Achaeans desired to return home, they were restrained by Achilles, who afterwards attacked the cattle of the Aeneas, sacking neighborhood cities such as Pedasus and Lyrnessus, where the Greeks captured the queen Briseis, and they killed Tennis, a son of Apollo, as well as Priam's son Troilus, and the sanctuary of Apollo. Now, however, the romance between Troilus and Chryseis, described in Geoffrey's Chaucer's Troilus and Chryseidae, and in William Shakespeare's Troilus and Chrysadia, is a medieval invention. In one account of the destruction of Troy, we're basically talking about Achilles today. Now, in the account, in one account of the destruction of Troy, in the Latin summary through which the story of Achilles was transmitted to medieval Europe, as well as Priam and Hecuba's 5 legitimate sons, or according to other sources, another son of Apollo. Now, despite his youth, he was one of the main Trojan war leaders, a horse fighter or a chariot fighter, according to Homer. Now, prophecies linked Troilus' fate to that of Troy, so that he was ambushed in an attempt to capture him. But yet Achilles, struck by the beauty of both Troilus and his sister Polyxena, and overcome with lust, directed his sexual attentions on the youth, who refusing to yield. Instead, they found himself decapitated upon an altar of Apollo. Now, later versions of the story suggested that Troilus was basically accidentally killed by Achilles in an over-ardent lover's embrace. Now, in this version of the myth, Achilles' death therefore came in retribution for the sacrilege of the temple, basically. Now, ancient writers treated Troilus as the epitome of a dead child who was being mourned by his parents. Now, had Troilus lived to adulthood, The first Vatican mythographer claimed that Troy would have been invincible. However, the motive is older and found already in Plautus's Bacchus, basically. Um, Now here in this painting is Achilles talking to Agamemnon from a mosaic from Pompeii, first century. Now Achilles and Agamemnon did not get along, even though that even basically basically there was there was two kings, basically one of Troy. There was supposed to be like the king. There was Agamemnon and Menelaus, and basically Menelaus basically Achilles did not get along with either one. Oh shit, my super down. Now in Homer's Iliad, its most famous narrative of Achilles' deeds in the Trojan War. And it's one of the most famous narratives for Achilles' deeds because it breaks down every deed that he ever did. I have the book somewhere in my room. And he's the central and basically he's the central theme of the poem. The first two lines of the Iliad read, "Sing, goddess of the rage of Peleus' son Achilles, the accursed rage that brought great suffering to the Achaeans." If you remember Pompeii, Pompeii is an actual town that was destroyed by a volcano years ago. Now Homer's poem, or epic poem, only covers a few weeks of the decades-long war, and it does not narrate Achilles' death. But it begins with Achilles withdrawing from the battle after being dishonored by Agamemnon, who was the commander of the Achaean forces. Now Agamemnon now Agamemnon has taken a woman called Chryseis as his slave. Her father, Chryseis, who is a priest of Apollo, begs Agamemnon to have Agamemnon return her to him, but Agamemnon refuses, and Apollo sends a plague among the Greeks. Now the prophet Calchas correctly determines the source of the troubles, but he will not speak unless Achilles vows to protect him. Now Achilles does so, and Calchas declares that Chryseis must be returned to her father. Agamemnon consents, but then commands that Achilles' slave Briseis, the daughter of Briseis, be brought to him to replace Chryseis. Now angry at the dishonor of having his plunder and glory taken away, and as he says later, because Achilles eventually falls in love with Briseis, with the urging of his mother Thetis, Achilles refuses to fight or lead his troops alongside the other Greek forces. Now, at the same time, burning with rage over Agamemnon's theft, Achilles prays to Thetis to convince Zeus to help the Trojans gain ground in the war so that he may regain his honor. Now here's a picture of Achilles and Briseis, right here. This is Achilles seeing Briseis to basically giving Briseis to Agamemnon from the house of the tragic poet in Pompeii. That's actually at a museum in Naples. Now, as the battle continues on against the Greeks, thanks to the influence of Zeus, Nestor declares that the Trojans are winning because Agamemnon has angered Achilles and urges the king to appease the warrior. Agamemnon agrees, and he sends Odysseus and two other chieftains, Ajax and Phoenix, and they promise that if Achilles returns to battle, Agamemnon will return the captive Briseis and other gifts. Achilles rejects all of it, and Agamemnon offers him and simply urges the Greeks to sail home as he is planning to do. Um, the Trojans, which are led by Hector, subsequently push the Greek army back toward the beaches and assault the Greek ships, but with the Greek forces on the verge of absolute destruction, Patroclus leads the Myrmidons into battle wearing Achilles' armor. Although Achilles remains at camp, Patroclus succeeds in pushing the Trojans back from the beaches, but is killed by Hector before he can lead a proper assault on the city of Troy, because Hector believes that Patroclus is Achilles, and he accidentally kills him. Um, After receiving the news of the death of Patroclus from Antilochus, the son of Nestor, Achilles grieves over his companion, his beloved cousin and companion's death. Now his mother Thetis comes to comfort the distraught Achilles, but she persuades Hephaestus to make new armor for him in place of the armor that Patroclus had been wearing, which was taken by Hector. Now, the new armor includes the shield of Achilles, described in great detail in the poem. Now, enraged over the death of Patroclus, Achilles ends his refusal to fight and takes the field, killing many men in his rage, but always seeking out Hector. Achilles, who is enraged, and in battle with the river god Scamander, who has become angry that Achilles is choking his waters with all the men he has killed, the god tries to drown Achilles, but is stopped by Hera and Hephaestus. Now Zeus himself takes note of Achilles' rage, and he sends the god to restrain him so that he would not go on to sack Troy itself before the time allotted for its destruction, seeming to show that the unhindered rage of Achilles can defy fate itself. And finally, Achilles finds his prey. Now, if we actually think about it, in the book, it describes the Trojan warriors going on for 10 years. But there's a movie called Troy that portrays the war being over in a short time. Because, with movies, they had the over-exaggerate shit. And they have to, basically limit the whole thing. Now Achilles chases Hector around the wall of Troy 3 times. Sorry. So Achilles chases Hector around the wall of Troy 3 times before Athena, in the form of Hector's favorite and dearest brother, Dephobus, persuades Hector to stop running around and fight Achilles face to face. After Hector realizes the trick, he knows the battle is inevitable, and wanting to go down fighting, he charges at Achilles with his only weapon, his sword, but misses, accepting his fate. Hector begs Achilles not to spare his life, but to treat his body with respect after killing him. Now Achilles tells Hector that it is hopeless to expect that of him, but declaring that my rage, my fury, would drive me now to hack your flesh away and eat you raw, and such agonies that you have caused me. Achilles then kills Hector and drags his corpse by his heels behind his chariot. After having a dream where Patroclus begs Achilles to hold his funeral, Achilles hosts a series of funeral games in honor of the companion. At the onset of his duel with Hector, Achilles is referred to as the brightest star in the sky, which comes on in the autumn. Orion's dog Sirius, a sign of evil, and during the cremation of Patroclus, he is compared to Hesperus, the evening star, or the western star Venus, while the burning of the funeral pie lasts until Phosphorus, the morning eastern star, also Venus, has set or descended. Um, you also have this, which is supposed to be the triumph of Achilles. Um, this is the triumph of Achilles fresco by Franz von Match in the Echelon, and that's Greece. Not sure what year that was ever painted. And this is the Rage of Achilles fresco, back to 1757. Then we go down here. Okay. Now, with the assistance of the god Hermes, Hector's father Priam goes to Achilles' tent to plead with Achilles to return Hector's body so that he can be properly buried. Now Achilles relents and promises a truce for the duration of the funeral rites, which was basically 10 days. Now the poem ends with the description of Hector's funeral, with the doom of Troy and Achilles himself still to come. And a base painting here. This is supposed to be Achilles fighting Memnon between Thetis and Eos, and it's an Attic black figure of Amphora centered around 510 BC. Later works, including the Aethiopus, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, and a work named Prospomerica, composed by Quintus of Smyrna in the 4th century BC, they relate further events into the Trojan War. When Thensila, queen of the Amazons and daughter of Ares, arrives in Troy, Priam hopes that she will defeat Achilles. Now, after his temporary truce with Priam, Achilles fights and kills the warrior queen, only to grieve over her death later. Initially taken back, he did not fight as intensely as usual, but once he realized that his distraction was endangering his life, he refocused and killed her. Now, following the death of Patroclus, Nestor's son Antilochus becomes Achilles' closest companion. When Memnon, son of the dawn goddess Eos and king of Ethiopia, slays Antilochus, Achilles once more obtains revenge on the battlefield, killing Memnon. Now, consequently, Eos will not let the sun rise until Zeus persuades her, and the fight between Achilles and Memnon over Antilochus echoes that of Achilles and Hector over Patroclus, except that Memnon, unlike Hector, was also the son of a goddess. Now, many Homeric scholars argue that that episode inspired many details in the Iliad's description of the death of Patroclus and Achilles' reaction to it. Now, the episode then formed the basis of the Scythic epic, Aethiopus, which was composed after the Iliad. After the Iliad. Now, possibly in the 7th century BC, the Aethiopus is now lost, except for scattered fragments quoted by later authors. Sometimes certain things get lost through history. Same thing with books in the Bible. Some books in the Bible were lost over time. Now here's Achilles attending to Patroclus' wound. This is a base painting. This is Achilles tending to Patroclus' wound by an arrow, and this is an Attic red figure, Kylix, centered around 500 BC, and it's held at a museum in Berlin, Germany. Now, the exact nature of Achilles' relationship with Patroclus has become a subject of dispute in both the classical period and modern times. Um, Now, in the Iliad, they portray Patroclus and Achilles' relationship as being the model of a deep and loyal friendship. Now, Homer does not suggest that Achilles and his close friend Patroclus had any sexual relationships together, but there is no direct evidence in the text of the Iliad that Achilles and Patroclus were ever lovers, but this theory was expressed by later authors. Commentators from classical antiquity to the present have often interpreted the relationship through the lens of their own culture. Now, in the 5th century BC Athens, the intense bond was often viewed in light of the Greek custom, which is the relationship between an older male and a younger one, usually a teenager. In Plato's Symposium, the participants in a dialogue about love assumed that Achilles and Patroclus were a couple, but Phaedrus argues that Achilles was the younger and more beautiful one, so he was the beloved and Patroclus was the lover. In Xenophon's Symposium, Socrates states that Achilles and Patroclus were not lovers, but they had a platonic friendship. Now, Kenneth Dover argues that ancient Greek had no words to distinguish heterosexual and homosexual back then, but it was assumed that a man could both desire handsome young men and have sex with women, but many pairs of men throughout history have been compared to Achilles and to Patroclus to imply a homosexual relationship. Now, the death of Achilles, even if considered solely as it occurred in the oldest sources, is a complex one, with many different versions. Now, starting. Now here's an actual marble sculpture of Achilles dying in the garden of where he was killed at, right up here. After Achilles dies, this is a base painting of Ajax carrying the body of Achilles. Now, the death of Achilles is a complex one, even if considered solely as it occurred in the oldest ones, is a complex one with many different versions of how he died. Now, starting with the oldest account, in Book 22 of the Iliad, Hector predicts with his last dying breath that Paris and Apollo will slay him at the Scaean gates leading to Troy, with an arrow to the heel, according to Statius. In Book 23, the sad spirit of the dead Patroclus visits Achilles just as he drifts off into slumber, requesting that his bones be placed with those of Achilles in his golden vase, a gift for his mother. In Book 11 of the Odyssey, Odysseus sails to the underworld and converses with the shades. One of these is Achilles, who then, greeted as blessed in life and blessed in death, responds that he would rather be a slave to the worst of the masters than the king of the dead. But Achilles then asks Odysseus of his son's exploits in the Trojan War, and Odysseus tells him of Neoptolemus' actions. Now, in Book 24 of the Odyssey, it gives the dead king Agamemnon's ghostly account of Achilles' death. Now, the bleached bones from Achilles' funeral pyre had been mixed with those of Patroclus and put into his mother's golden vase. Now, also, the bones of Antilochus, who had become closer to Achilles than any other following Patroclus' death, were separately enclosed. Now, the customary funeral games of a hero were performed, and a massive tomb or mound was built on the Hellespont for approaching seagoers to celebrate. Now Achilles was represented in the Aethiopius as living. Now, okay. Now Achilles was represented in the Aethiopus as living after his death in the island of Luki, at the mount of the river Danube. Um, Now another version of Achilles' death is that he himself um, is that he fell deeply in love with one of the Trojan princess, Polyxena. Now Achilles asked Priam for Polyxena's hand in marriage, but Priam is willing because it would mean the end of the war. It would mean the end of the war and an alliance with the world's greatest warrior. Now, but while Priam is overseeing the private marriage of Polyxena and Achilles, Paris, who would have to give up Helen if Achilles married his sister, hides in the bushes and shoots Achilles with a divine arrow, killing him. Now, according to some accounts, he had married Medea in life, um, so that after both their deaths they were united in the Elysian fields of Hades, as Hera had promised. Um, Thetis and Apollonius's Argonautica. Um, Now, here's a base painting of Ajax and Odysseus fighting over, um, doing pretty good. Now here's a picture. Now this is a base painting of Ajax and Odysseus fighting over the armor of Achilles. Um, Achilles' armor um, was the object of a feud between Odysseus and Ajax the Great. Now, they completed it. They competed for it by giving speeches on why they were the bravest after Achilles to their Trojan prisoners. Um, Avalanche is here. Good to see some people hopping on and stuff like that. Who, after considering both men's presentations, decided that Odysseus was more deserving of the armor over Ajax. Now furious that Ajax is furious that they didn't consider him for it, but they considered Odysseus. Ajax would curse Odysseus, which earned him the ire of Athena, who temporarily made Ajax so mad with grief and anguish that he began killing sheep, thinking them his comrades. Now after a while, Athena looked at this madness, and Ajax realized that he actually had been killing sheep, and he was so ashamed that he committed suicide. Odysseus eventually gave the armor to Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles. When Odysseus encounters the shade of Ajax much later in the house of Hades, Ajax is still so angry about the outcome of the competition that he refuses to speak to Odysseus at all. Now, the armor that they fought for was made by Hephaestus, and thus much stronger and more beautiful than any armor that a mortal could carry or craft. Now, Thetis had the gear made for Achilles because his first set was worn by Patroclus when he went to battle and taken by Hector when he killed Patroclus. Now, the shield of Achilles was also made by the fire god. His legendary spear was given to him by his mentor Chiron before he participated in the Trojan War. It was called the Pelian spear, which allegedly no other man could wield or carry. Now a relic claimed to be Achilles' bronze-headed spear was preserved for centuries in the temple of Athena on the Acropolis of Palaeus, which is a port on the Pamphylian Gulf. The city was visited in 333 by Alexander the Great, who envisioned himself as the new Achilles and carried the Iliad with him wherever he went. Now, but his court biographers do not mention the spear. However, it was shown in the time of Pausanias in the 2nd century BC. Now, numerous paintings on poetry have suggested a tale not mentioned in the literary traditions, but at some point in the war, Achilles and Ajax were playing a board game, and they were absorbed in the game and oblivious to the surrounding battle. The Trojans attacked and reached the heroes, who were saved only by an intervention of Athena herself. Um, Now, the tomb of Achilles, extant throughout antiquity in the Troad, was venerated by the Thessalians, but also by Persian expeditionary forces, as well as by Alexander the Great, um, and the Roman Emperor um, Caracalla. Now, Achilles' cult was also to be found at other places, e.g., on some islands in the Sporadus and Sparta, which had a sanctuary, in Elis, and in Achilles' homeland Thessaly, as well as in the Magna Graecia cities of Tarentum, Locri, and Croton, accounting for an almost pan-Hellenic cult to the hero. Um, here's a sacrifice of marble sculpture of Polysena and tumultuous shaped tomb of Achilles with the tripod in front on the Polysena sarcophagus. Um, now, um, Now the cult of Achilles is illustrated in the Polysena sarcophagus around 500 BC, which depicts the sacrifice of Polysena near the tumulus of Achilles. Now Strabo also suggested that such a cult of Achilles existed in Troad. Um, Now, the spread and intensity of the hero's veneration among the Greeks that had settled on the northern coast of the Pontus, on the Pontus, Xenos, which is today's Black Sea, appears to have been remarkable. An archaic cult is attested for the Milesian colony of Obia, as well as for an island in the middle of the Black Sea, today identified with the Snake Island, which is Ukraine. Early dedicatory inscriptions from the Great colonies in the Black Sea and inscribed clay discs, these possibly being votive offerings from Mobile, the area of the Berezim Island and the Tauric Chersonese. It attests the existence of a heroic cult of Achilles. Now, from the 6th century BC onward, the cult was still thriving in the 3rd century BCE, which when dedicatory stelae from Mobile referred to an Achilles Pontarchus, which is roughly Lord of the Sea or Lord of the Pontus Xenos, who was invoked as a protector of the city of Mobile, and is venerated on par with Olympian gods such as the local Apollo postulates, Hermes, Agorius, and Poseidon, who's the god of the sea. Now Pliny the Elder, in his natural history, mentions a port of the Achaia and an island of Achilles, which is famous. Let me look up something here for a minute. Now Pliny the Elder, who was born in the year 23 BC and died in the year 79 BC. He died in the Mount Vesuvius eruption of Pompeii while trying to save a friend. But in his natural history, he mentions a port and an island of Achilles, now famous for the tomb that famous for the tomb that man, um, situated somewhat nearby Olbia and the Dnieper Bug estuary. Furthermore, at 125 Roman miles from this island, he places a peninsula which stretches forth in the shape of a sword obliquely, which is called Dromos Achilleos, which is the race course of Achilles. And it's considered to be the place of the hero's exercise or of games instituted by him. Now, this last feature of Pliny's account is considered to be the iconic spirit called today Tendra, or Cosa, or Cosa, or Cosa Tendra and Cosa de Jarl Gulch, situated between the mount of the Dnieper and the Karknet Bay, but which is hardly 125 Roman miles, but it's around 185 kilometers away from the Dnieper Bug estuary. As Pliny states, to the racecourse he gives a length of about 80 miles, whereas the spit measures around 70 miles or 70 kilometers or 43 miles today. In the following chapter of his book, Pliny refers to the same island and introduces two further names for it: Lus, Armakaron from the Greek, which means island of the blessed. Now, the present day measures he gives at this point seems to account for an identification of Aquileia or Lus with today's Snake Island. Now, Pliny's contemporary Pomponius Mela tells that Achilles was buried on an island named Aquileia, situated between the Borythenus and the Ister, adding to the geographical confusion. Now the ruins of a square temple measuring 30 meters to a side, that was possibly dedicated to Achilles, were discovered by Captain Nikolai Christie back in 1823 on Snake Island. A second exploration in 1840 showed that the construction of a lighthouse had destroyed all traces of this temple. Now, a 5th century BCE black glaze Lekythos inscription found on the island in 1840 reads, "Glaucus, son of Poseidon, dedicated me to Achilles, lord of Leuci." And another inscription from the 5th or 4th century BCE, a statue was dedicated to Achilles, lord of Leuci, by a citizen of Olbia. While in a further dedication, the city of Olbia confirms its continuous maintenance of the island's cult, again suggesting its quality as a place of supra-regional hero veneration. Now, the heroic cult dedicated to Achilles on Lucy seems to go back to an account from the lost epic Aeotheopis, according to which, after his untimely death, Thetis had snatched her son from the funeral pyre and removed him to a mythical island known as White Island. Now, already in the 5th century BCE, Pindar had mentioned a cult of Achilles on a bright island of the Black Sea, while in another of his works, Pindar would later retell the story of the immortalized Achilles living on a geographically indefinite island of the blessed, together with other heroes such as his father Peleus and Cadmus. Now, Pindar retells the story of the immortalized Achilles like I was saying, that basically he would um, he would retell the story of the murderless Achilles living on a geographically indefinite island of the blessed, together with the other heroes, such as his father Peleus and Cadmus. But however, and well known as the connection of these mythical fortunate isles, um, Homeric Elysium, with the stream Oceanus, which according to Greek mythology surrounds the inhabited world, which should have accounted for the identification of the northern strands of the within it. Now, Guy Hadrian has found further evidence for this connection of Achilles with the northern margin of the inhabited world in a poem that was written by Alcaeus, speaking of Achilles, lord of Scythia, and the opposition of north and south, and is evoked by Achilles' fight against the prince Memnon, who in his turn would be removed to his homeland by his mother Eros after his death. It's said that the goddess Thetis raised this island from the sea for her son Achilles, who dwells here. Here is the which now. But here is the temple and his statue in archaic work. This island is not inhabited, and goats graze on it, but not many, which the people who happen to arrive here with their ships sacrifice to Achilles. Now, in this temple, are also deposited a great many holy gifts, craters, rings, and precious stones that are offered to Achilles for his gratitude. Now, one can still read inscriptions in Greek and Latin in which Achilles is praised and celebrated, but some of these are worded in Patroclus' honor, because those who wish to be favored by Achilles honor Patroclus at the same time. Now, every morning they would fly out to sea, wet their wings with water, and return quickly to the temple and sprinkle it. And after they finish the sprinkling, they clean the hearth of the temple with their wings. Now other people say say still more, that some of the men who reach this island come here intentionally. They bring animals in their ships destined to be sacrificed, but some of these animals they slaughter. Others they set free in the island in Achilles' honor, but there are others who are forced to come to this island by sea storms, as they have no sacrificial animals. But they wish to slaughter the victims chosen from among the animals that they graze freely on the island, and to deposit in exchange the price which they consider fair. But in case the oracle denies them permission because there's an oracle here, they add something to the price offered, and the oracle refuses again. They add something more until at last the oracle agrees that the price is sufficient, and then the victim doesn't run away anymore, but it waits willingly to be caught. So there is a great quantity of silver here consecrated to the hero as price for the sacrificial victims. Now, to some of the people who come across this island, Achilles appears in dreams. To others, he would appear even during their navigation. But if they were not too far away, he would instruct them as to which part of the island that they would better anchor the ships on. Now one of the Greeks, Dionysius, who probably lived during the 1st century, wrote that the island was called Lucy because the wild animals which lived there were white. It is said that there, in Lucy Island, resides the soul of Achilles and other heroes who have died, and that they wander through the uninhabited valleys of this island. And this is how Jove awarded the men who had distinguished themselves through their virtues, because through each and every virtue, they had acquired everlasting honor. Now, similarly, others relate the island's name to its white cliffs, snakes, or birds dwelling there. Now, the Pausanians have been told that the island is covered with forests, and it's full of animals, and some wild, some tame. Now, in this island, there was also Achilles' temple and his statue. Lucy had also had a reputation as a place of healing. But the Pausanians report that the Delphic Pythia sent the lord of Trojan to be cured of a chest wound, and and Ammianus Marcellus attributes the killing to waters on the island. Um, okay. Now Strabo mentioned that the cape of the race course of Achilles was sacred to Achilles, and although it was treeless, was called Alsos. Alsos in Greek means grove. Um, a number of commercial port cities of the Greek waters were dedicated to Achilles. Now, Herodotus, Pliny the Elder, and Strabo reported of the existence of a town called Achilleion, which was built by settlers from the Mytilene in the 6th century BCE, and it was close to the hero's presumed burial mound in the Troad. Now, later attestations point to an Achillean in Messenia, according to Stephanus Byzantinus, and in Achilleos in Laconia. Now, Nicolai Densusinio recognized a connection to Achilles in the name of Aquileia, and of the northern arm of the Danube delta called Chilia, presumably from an older Achillei. Now, although with his conclusion that Lucy had sovereign rights over the Black Sea, evokes modern rather than the archaic sea law. Um, Now, the king of Epirus claimed to be descended from Achilles throughout his son, Neoptolemus, Alexander the Great, son of the Epirote, Princess Olympias, could therefore also claim this descent, and in many ways they strove to be like their great ancestor. But he is said to have visited the tomb of Achilles at Achilleion while passing Troy, and in 216 the Roman Emperor Caracalla, while on his way to war against Parthia, emulated Alexander by holding games around Achilles' tumulus. Now, shit. Okay. Now the Greek tragedy Aeschylus had Greek tragedian basically Aeschylus would talk about a lot of deaths, so basically he was very good at detailing every account. He had wrote a trilogy of plays about Achilles, given one of the titles Achilles by modern scholars. Now the tragedies relate the deeds of Achilles during the Trojan War, including his defeat of Hector and his eventual death when an arrow shot by Paris and guided by Apollo punctures his heel. Exant fragments of Achilles and other Aeschylean fragments have been assembled to produce a workable modern play. Now, the first part of the Achilles trilogy, the Myrmidons, focus on the relationship between Achilles and the chorus, who represent the Aeschylean army, the Achaean army, and they tried to convince Achilles to give up his quarrel with Agamemnon. Only a few lines survive to this day. In Plato's Symposium, Phaedrus points out that Aeschylus portrayed Achilles as a lover as a lover of Patroclus, and Patroclus as their beloved. Now, Phaedrus argues that this is incorrect because Achilles, being the younger and more beautiful of the two, was the beloved who loved his lover so much that he chose to die to avenge him. Um, Now, towards the end of the 5th century BC, um, a more negative view of Achilles emerges in Greek drama. Now, Euripides refers to Achilles in a bitter or ironic tone in Hecuba, Electra, and in Iphigenia and Elus. Now, some of these works were lost throughout the time, but some have remained. Now, other contemporary tragedians such as Astydamas had wrote works on Achilles that are completely lost today, so no epistoph was ever found. Um, Now, in Greek philosophy, Zeno, the philosopher Zeno of Elea, centered or Elia, centered on one of his paradoxes on an imaginary foot race between swift-footed Achilles and a tortoise, by which he attempted to show that Achilles could not catch up to a tortoise with a head start, and therefore that motion and change were impossible. But as a student of the monist Parmenides and a member of the Eleatic school, Zeno believed time and motion to be illusions. Um, in Hippias Minor, a Socratic dialogue attributed to Plato, who an arrogant man named Hippias argues with Socrates, and the two get into a discussion about lying. They decide that a person who is intentionally false must be better than a person who is unintentionally false, on the basis that someone who lies unintentionally must understand the subject about which they are lying about. Now, Socrates uses various analogs discussing athletics and the sciences to prove his point. The two also reference Homer extensively, but Socrates and Hippias agree that Odysseus, who concocted a number of lies throughout the Odyssey and other stories in the Trojan War cycle, was false intentionally. Now, Achilles, like Odysseus, told numerous falsehoods. Now, Hippias believes that Achilles was a generally honest man, while Socrates believes that Achilles lied for his own benefit. Now, the two argue over whether it is better to lie on purpose or by accident. Now, Socrates eventually abandons Homeric arguments and makes sports analogies to drive home the point. Now, someone who does wrong on purpose is a better person than someone who does wrong unintentionally. Now, the Romans, who traditionally traced their lineage back to Troy, which took a highly negative view of Achilles. Now, Virgil refers to Achilles as a savage and a merciless butcher of men, while Horace portrays Achilles ruthlessly slaying women and children. Other writers, such as Catullus, Propertius, and Ovid, represent a second strand of disparagement with an emphasis on Achilles' erratic career. Now, this strand continues in Latin accounts of the Trojan War by writers such as Dictys, Cretentius, and Darius, and in Benoit de Saint Maurice Roman de Troyes, and Guido del Colonies Historia, which remained the most widely read and retold version of the matter of Troy until the 17th century. Now, Achilles was described by the Byzantine chronicler Leo the Deacon not as Hellene, but as a Scythian, Well, according to the Byzantine author John Malalas, his army was made up of a tribe previously known as the Myrmidons and later as Bulgars. Um, in literature, Achilles appears in Dante's Inferno. He is seen in Hell's second circle and that of lust. Achilles is portrayed as a former hero who has become lazy and devoted to the love of Patroclus in William Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida. Despicably, he has his Myrmidons murder the unarmed Hector, and then gets them to announce that Achilles himself has slain Hector as if it had been a fair fight. He's also portrayed in a lot of movies. Achilles is also the frequent subject of a lot of operas and ballets and related genres. He's portrayed so there's a lot of movies that are portrayed by him. So there's a movie that was released called Helena back in 1924, and Achilles was played by a guy named Carlo Aldini. In the 1954 film Ulysses, he was played by Piero Lully. In the 1956 film Helen of Troy, he's played by Stanley Baker. In the 1961 film The Trojan Horse, he's played by Arturo Dominici. I don't know if I'm saying that name right. In the 1962 film, The Fury of Achilles, he's played by Gordon Mitchell. In the 1997 film, the 1997 made-for-TV television miniseries, The Odyssey, Achilles is played by Richard Truitt. In the 2003 also television made-for-TV miniseries Helen of Troy, he's played by Joe Montana. In the 2004 film Troy, Achilles is played by Brad Pitt. And that was actually not a bad one. I actually do like that one, the Brad Pitt version. Now the name Achilles has been used for at least 9 different Royal Navy warships between 1744, since 1744, both as HMS Achilles and with the French spelling HMS Achilles, which is a 60-foot gunship of that named and served at the Battle of Belle Isle in 1761, with the 74 gunship served on the Battle of Trafalgar. No, there's a species of lizard called the Anolis Achilles, which has widened heel plates, is named after Achilles, the Greek war hero himself. Now that is all for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I will be back next week once I get more of my my testing done and my studying done for my college class. Next week we're gonna pick up at the 12 Olympians. So I hope you enjoyed this video of Achilles. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, Rusty the King. I also have another YouTube channel called RBW King. You can check that out at your own leisure. Give a like and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment. Let me know what you guys are thinking. If you missed the live stream, I hope you guys will tune in next week. If you guys if any of you guys have missed it. So just make sure to smash the like and subscribe button. Leave a comment, let me know what you guys are thinking, and if you want to support my work even further, you can donate to my Patreon link, which you're going to find in the about section of YouTube. And for just a little, a few bucks a video or a monthly donation can go a long way, and thanks for listening. Also, let me know who your favorite Greek war hero is, and I will and let me know why, and then we'll try to bring that up in the video for next week too. So I hope you guys enjoyed.